Welcome to Future Proof, the marketing podcast from Kantar, the world's leading marketing data and analytics company, and Side Business School, University of Oxford. In each episode, we speak with marketing leaders and share insights to help brands and business leaders navigate the ever-changing marketing landscape and hopefully dispel some myths and misconceptions along the way. Our guest today is Thomas Von der Fuhr, who is Head of Organisational Performance at Kantar. So thanks for joining us today, Thomas. So we've just launched an amazing piece of work, a new report about the use of and attitudes towards GenAI among senior marketers. It's a really interesting report. It's called The Capability Curve, GenAI in Marketing, Fear or FOMO. FOMO, for those of you who don't know, is fear of missing out. So, Thomas, tell a little bit, first of all, about your role at Kantar in organisational performance. What does that mean?
Yes, happy to do, Jane, and thanks for having me. So, organizational performance in a nutshell, to explain it as simple as possible. Like, we are part of consulting. So I'm based in Amsterdam, working for the organizational performance practice. That is part of the consulting division of Kantar. And if you look at the consulting division, what we basically do is we help companies drive brand growth. If you then look at what organizational performance is doing within that, is we basically think about creating the right kind of structure and processes to make sure that you then equip your teams with the relevant tools and training to deliver that brand growth, simply said. And I said, leading that practice globally. And as a result of that, also we decided to launch an interesting study that we will be talking about today.
Yeah, so this interesting study, I know it involved a number of different stages, including interviewing over 50 marketing professionals. So why don't you just tell us a little bit first about what the purpose of the study was, why you decided to do it, and then a bit about how you did it.
So for that one, I need to go back one step, Jane. So last year we have launched the Capability Curve, which is basically a go-to place where we, from a consulting perspective, talk about capability relevant kind of topics. One of those topics obviously was like, what do we do with GenAI? And also, how is it going to impact the marketing function? Because what we felt, and that's not a surprise to you or to any of the listeners probably, is there is a lot written about GenAI already, so it feels a bit like an afterthought to then also talk about this topic. But what we felt was missing is the link to capability. As in, how do we expect that the marketing function is going to evolve? And how does that ultimately then also impact the trainings that you need to put in place to make your marketers ready? And that's the reason why we said, okay, let's then launch like an initiative, which started off small, ultimately it got bigger and bigger. Where we said, let's do it the right way and interview at least 50 plus CMOs, marketing directors, and capability heads around the world to understand what their main challenges are when it comes to GenAI adoption, but ultimately also how they think that capability is going to transform in the next couple of years.
Okay, so if you were to describe it in a nutshell, what were the key kind of top line findings that you can share with us? And we will delve into some of those in a bit more detail.
Yes. So I think to start off from the first kind of conclusion is that it's no longer a question whether GenAI is going to impact marketing. It is impacting marketing already quite a bit. It is going to have a more significant impact in the next 3 to 5 years. And the overall feeling from the people that we interviewed is that we're still scratching the surface. So much more change to come in the next couple of years. The second one is if you look at like the role that GenAI can play, it can actually play different kind of roles in your organization. And we see more and more companies moving from using GenAI for predominantly efficiency reasons to much more like, how can you then use it for the more strategic kind of initiatives that I'm working on in my marketing department as well. And that's also like where the best practice cases sit. It's like those organizations who really move from efficiency to effectiveness. That's where it becomes super interesting. So I think the third kind of conclusion or learning is that when you make the link to capability, is that we expect that that still needs to be a human in the loop. So for those people who are concerned about their jobs, yes, it is going to have an impact on marketing, and certain skills will become more important than they are today, for example. But it's not, or at least that's also like what we saw in the interviews we conducted, that skills will become obsolete very soon. It's much more around how do you make sure that you now sort of like understand what Gen AI can do in your marketing processes. And we've looked at certain kind of marketing processes that will be impacted quite a lot. How you then sort of like invest in equipping your team with the right relevant skills to be successful.
Yeah, because it's all about empowerment, really. It seems this stage of the Gen AI journey. It shouldn't be, kept to kind of one person in a team or just the CMO. It has to be fairly widespread to understand what the potential impact will be and to make the most out of the technology.
Definitely. And this is also one of the big challenges that organizations face today, Jane. So indeed, you see that a lot of companies are struggling with the organizational readiness of this. So a lot of companies are trying out or launching kind of use cases around Gen AI, but quite often restricted to a small team, to a handful of people. And they're now looking for like, okay, and how do we scale it in our entire organization? And that's quite a big challenge. And that's in my opinion, I think one of the biggest challenges of this year, probably for a lot of organizations.
Just step back a little bit and say, what's your point of view on why Gen AI is so challenging for organizations and for marketers? I mean, clearly technologies are accelerating at a rapid pace, so change is kind of pretty much a given. But what is it that marketers are struggling with? Why is it so difficult?
So in the report, we try to sort of summarize it into 5 key barriers in a way, barriers to Gen AI adoption. The first one is around limited understanding. So as said, like still a lot of marketers who see Gen AI as a threat instead of an opportunity. And that's often driven by that they don't have the full visibility of how and where it can help them in their day-to-day marketing operations. So that's one. There's one around ethics and compliance. And this is probably one of the biggest barriers for Gen AI adoption or for rapid adoption, because there is a big concern that misleading AI-generated content can harm consumer trust, can ultimately harm your brand, of course, as well. So there's something around ethics and compliance that is holding people back. Then the third one is data management and human oversight. So you want to be 100% sure that the prompts that you use are, of course, treated in the right kind of way. And then there are 2 that are more focused on the organizational component, as I alluded to earlier. So lack of capabilities. Simply said, new tools require new capabilities. And you can debate whether prompting, which is one of the skills that is then mentioning a lot, is a new skill or not. But you definitely need to make sure that people know how to communicate with a machine to get most out of the tools as well. But ultimately, it's also very important now to invest in your foundational marketing skills, because it's impossible to assess or judge the quality coming out of ChatGPT or whatever version you have if you don't know what good looks like. So when you talk to CMOs, they find it critical that you double down on investing in the core foundational marketing skills, such as brand positioning, such as integrated marketing communication and innovation, for example. And then the 5th one is the one that I mentioned already, organizational readiness. So indeed, like the challenge of how do I scale this nice initiative where we see some positive results to making sure that your entire marketing function is using it and getting most out of the tool.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of barriers that you're talking about there. I guess the thing that you also came up with, I mean, what interested me was that of all the 50 plus organizations and brands involved, a lot of them are very well-known household names. So they're operating at scale globally, many of them. And so this is, I think, a really good indication of the sort of state of readiness of many brand marketing organizations. So how did you kind of decide who was ready or who was more ready and who was less ready? How did you divide them up into state of preparedness?
So there is no sort of like hard quant way how we did this exercise, but what we have done as part of the discussions we had is we try to summarize the role of GenAI into a certain framework. The framework, and people can find it in the report as well because it's very visual, but like it's basically centered around two axes. One is spanning from executional, tactical kind of initiatives to the more strategic ones. And the other axis was focusing or using GenAI for internal initiatives only to ultimately also moving to consumer facing. And what you see quite often is that most organizations, including ourselves at Kantar, you start from operational kind of efficiency. The internal kind of tasks like recording a meeting and summarizing the key kind of actions coming out of that meeting is the sort of like starting point for a lot of organizations. When it becomes interesting, or where we see leading examples going to, is basically all of those four quadrants, because you can basically use it for all of those different kind of initiatives. And then I think that's also like what we're seeing is that best-in-class organizations make that shift to effectiveness as well, as mentioned, and have been really able to reduce, for example, your innovation process from several months to several weeks. Or like examples of companies have been able to sort of like get as high quality kind of creative outputs coming out of the tests being generated by GenAI. And that's where, for me, it becomes as a marketer super interesting.
And I guess we've got some other things going on as well, which is maybe lots of marketers are experimenting in certain areas with AI tools or AI solutions that can help them with a particular part of the process. But is it your understanding that there's possibly a bigger picture here, which is that GenAI could disrupt the process? We could create new end-to-end processes, perhaps where GenAI can replace people in some roles, but also help expedite processes as well. Are people taking the bigger view here?
I think fundamentally changing the processes, not so much, or at least that's not what I'm seeing yet. But what I do see is that when you look at the end-to-end process, and we've done that for the sort of marketing areas that we feel are impacted the most and or are going to be impacted the most in the next couple of years, which is integrated marketing communication, including creative. It's the innovation process, and it's your planning and strategy process. And I don't have the feeling that the process as such is going to be completely moved upside down. But within that process, there are certain stages where you are going to rely much more on GenAI or machine learning as well. And there are other kind of elements of that process where the human in the loop that I was talking about is more critical than ever. So taking, for example, a very simple use case of your planning and strategy kind of process. Like, of course, if you look at like the trainings that we deliver now, you can spend hours and hours on sort of doing a landscape assessment and getting to issues and opportunities. GenAI can help you with that a lot. So they can sort of like synthesize and analyze vast amounts of information and turn that into initial opportunity spaces. The request, or like the skill from a marketeer, is then to be able to judge or validate that, and then to use your own business acumen as well to say, how can I improve this? And therefore, I don't feel that the processes as such are going to change much, but like where you spend your time on as a marketeer is going to change most likely.
Okay. And how does this, do you think, impact the actual organizational structure and design for marketing teams? Is this going to be something that we discover in the next few years, or is this something that leading organizations are thinking about now?
So I think leading organizations are looking into this already right now. As in, we've done some work with Reckitt, for example, who is always like leading by example, I think, here. So they're constantly looking for what's next. And we have been on a journey with their insights function for the last couple of years. Their insights function, or the head of I&A at some point, reach out to us to say, how can we sort of like relook at our competency framework, like in terms of what are the skills and capabilities that we need to build in our insights and analytics function, And how is that going to shift by looking at what Gen AI is going to do? So that doesn't mean that we're in sort of like org design stage yet, as in that we look at the entire kind of operating model, but they are looking already into like, okay, what does that mean for the skill of the future of the insights function? And equally so, I can imagine that a lot of marketing organizations are doing something similar.
Yeah, but presumably there's also some late adopters, either who are kind of overwhelmed by the perceived barriers or aren't really sure where to start. So what do we say to those organizations in the report?
So it's so you definitely see sort of late adopters here, quite often being in heavily regulated industries. So this morning I was, for example, talking to someone in the banking industry, quite often running behind a bit, but that doesn't mean that you cannot get started yet, right? So you can then find excuses behind all of the barriers that I just listed or mentioned. But I think one of the key things that organizations can start doing, regardless of how regulated your business is looking at where your team spent their time on today versus where you ideally want them to spend time on in the future. So ultimately, and that's also for me where it becomes super interesting, is if you are using GenAI in the right way and it is giving you efficiency back, or like it is driving efficiency, what are you going to do with that spare time? And ultimately, you want to make sure that that's then linked to brand growth, of course. Well, you can do a very simple assessment to have an understanding of where you're spending time on today versus ideally where you want your marketers to spend time on in the future. And that then could be used as a sort of like almost business case to say, these are then sort of initiatives that we're going to launch internally to understand also the potential value that Gen AI can bring. Because I think as a last point also, Jane, that in those organizations, sort of building awareness and appreciation of what a tool like Gen AI can do is also something that needs to be part of your narrative. It's like really convincing stakeholders that this can really drive efficiency, but ultimately also effectiveness if done well. And their competitors are probably working on something similar at the same time. So
the thing is that marketers have always been very responsive and very adaptable, very agile to change, whether it's incorporating new technologies, responding to, for example, a global pandemic, understanding new media channels, new ways of communicating with consumers, new ways of leveraging their investment dollars in marketing. But GenAI is very pervasive. It kind of potentially could reach everything that marketers do. So do you think we're at some kind of turning point in marketing, not only as a capability, but also how marketers perceive their ability to drive growth? So is Gen AI genuinely transformative?
I like that question a lot. In my mind, it is really a pivotal moment. At the same point, I also don't want to make things bigger than they are, because we probably had the same kind of conversation years ago when omnichannel entered the world. And that's also interesting if you look at it from a capability perspective. Like we treated that really as a standalone kind of capability back in the days. It has now been fully integrated into everything we do, right? And the feeling is that this is probably going to happen with Gen AI as well. So for sure, there is a sort of like short-term fix in terms of building AI savviness, if you will, making sure that people understand what Gen AI can do, how it can help you as a marketer, etc. But then ultimately in the long term, this will be fully integrated into those other foundational marketing processes or skills again. But I do think it is a pivotal moment, as in that you see a lot of traction now, a lot of brands experimenting with it and also like leading the way. So if you look at it from a competitive advantage, it feels like this is the moment to at least experiment yourself as a marketer, how it can help you. Because there were quite some people who also said, well, given that the tool is still developing as such as well, and it's also still a tool that is learning, wouldn't it make sense to wait for like 1 or 2 years, and then probably some acquisitions have been done anyway, and then you just invest in the tool that's perfectly well. But then, like, I think you miss out on the component of learning throughout the kind of journey. So therefore, I feel like it's a pivotal moment. And to land it with an anecdote, I really loved the way that the Drum, like in the UK, spoke about this. So they created almost chapters for the last couple of years. where they said if 2 years ago, so 2023, was about wow, so wow, GenAI is going to have an impact. 2024 was around how, like how do we then use that in the best possible way? And they said 2025 is about now, really making sure that you jump on this trend right now. And I really like that. So I'm having the feeling that it is quite a pivotal moment, Jane. You can do this interview with me in a year's time. And then
We'll
I'll
see
let
what
know.
you say then. Yeah. You'll have to come up with something else that rhymes with now. You've been listening to Future Proof from Kantar and Side Business School. For all episodes and more information, visit kantar.com or oxfordfutureofmarketing.com. If you enjoyed this, please leave a rating and a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app so you never miss an episode.